The sun was slipping down the edge of the wide valley when Eli Turner rode his tired horse along the old dirt road. Dust hung in the air behind him, glowing like smoke in the orange light. He had been traveling for many days, going from one ranch to another, offering his hands for work where it was needed. His boots were worn thin, his hat faded, and his voice rough from long rides under open skies. He was used to silence and long miles, but that evening something different waited ahead. A crooked wooden fence marked the start of a small farm. The land looked poor and dry, but someone had worked hard to keep it alive. A few rows of corn still stood, yellow and thin, fighting for water. The windmill turned slowly, creaking like an old song. Then Eli saw her. A young woman near the barn, struggling with a heavy sack of grain almost half her size. She tried to lift it onto a cart, her small frame shaking under the weight. Eli stopped his horse and watched for a moment. The way she moved told him more than words could. She was exhausted, but she kept trying. He swung down from the saddle and walked toward her, dust crunching under his boots. "Need a hand, ma'am?" he asked softly. She turned quickly, startled, her eyes wide and cautious. Her hair was tied back under a faded cloth, and her face carried the kind of beauty that came from strength, not makeup or city polish. She looked no older than 20. For a second she seemed ready to refuse help, but the weight of the sack gave her away. "I can manage," she said, though her voice trembled. Eli didn't push. He simply nodded and reached down anyway, lifting the sack with one strong arm and setting it on the cart as if it weighed nothing. "Guess it's easier with two hands that aren't tired," he said, with a small grin. The young woman hesitated, then gave a quiet sigh. "Thank you. My name's Lydia Mayfield. Eli Turner," he said, tipping his hat, passing through looking for work. Lydia studied him for a moment, unsure whether to trust him. But something in his calm eyes seemed honest. "My father could use help," she said at last. "He's been sick. I do most of the work now." Eli nodded, glancing toward the farmhouse. "If you'll feed me and give my horse a place to rest, I'll work till sundown." She gave a faint smile, the first one of the evening. "That sounds fair." As the sun dipped lower, Eli worked beside her, mending the fence and carrying feed to the barn. The air filled with the smell of hay and dry earth. Lydia showed him where everything was kept, still quiet, still watching him as though unsure what kind of man he was. Eli noticed her careful steps, the way she avoided walking too fast, the small wince that crossed her face now and then. She was hiding pain, though he didn't yet know why. When night fell, the farm turned peaceful. The frogs started singing near the pond, and the moon rose silver above the fields. Lydia called him in for supper. The house was small but neat. A single lamp glowed on the wooden table, lighting the cracks in the walls and the faces of two people who had seen too many hard seasons. Her father sat in a chair by the stove, a gray-haired man wrapped in a blanket. He looked weak, his hands shaking slightly as he lifted his cup. "Evening, son," he greeted. "Lydia says you helped with the fence. You've earned a meal." "Glad to help, sir," Eli replied. They ate quietly, simple bread, beans, and boiled potatoes. Eli could feel the weight of the old man's eyes on him, measuring his character. Lydia moved slowly, careful with every step. When she bent to pick up a plate, her hand shook and she almost dropped it. Eli reached out without thinking, steadying it before it fell. "Sorry," she murmured. "No harm done," he said gently. After supper, Lydia's father began to cough. She hurried to bring him water, her face filled with worry. Eli stood and asked if he could help with anything. The old man waved him off. "You've done enough for today. You can sleep in the barn. It's dry and clean enough." Eli thanked him, took his hat, and stepped outside. The night air was cool and the stars shone like white stones scattered across the dark sky. From the open barn door, he could still see Lydia through the small kitchen window, helping her father to bed. Something about her quiet strength touched him. Inside the barn, Eli spread a blanket over some hay and lay back, listening to the wind move through the fields. He was used to sleeping under the stars, but tonight rest didn't come easy. His mind kept returning to the girl's tired eyes, her small limp, the faint line of sadness that never left her face. The next morning, the rooster crowed before dawn. Eli was already awake. He stepped out, washed his face with cold water from the pump, and got to work. He fixed a broken latch on the barn door and checked the water trough. When Lydia came out with a basket of eggs, she stopped for a moment, watching him work. "You don't waste time, do you?" she said softly. Eli smiled. "Can't help it. The sun don't wait for anyone. She gave a short laugh, the sound surprising even herself. Well, I hope you like hard work. There's plenty here. They worked side by side most of the morning. The silence between them was easy now, not awkward. Sometimes Eli would hum an old trail tune, and Lydia would shake her head with amusement. When she tripped once on a loose board, Eli caught her before she fell. His hand brushed her arm gently and she froze for a second as if unused to anyone's kindness. "You all right?" he asked. "Yes," she said quickly, stepping back and smoothing her skirt. "Just clumsy." Eli let it go. He didn't want to make her uncomfortable, but again, he noticed the slight limp when she walked, the way she winced when she bent down. Something deeper than tired muscles caused that pain. By noon, they sat under the shade of a tree to rest. Lydia handed him a piece of bread and an apple. He thanked her and tried to lighten the air with a story about a wild horse he once tried to tame. She laughed again, this time longer, her eyes bright for a brief moment. Eli liked the sound. It reminded him that even in hard places there was still something good left in the world. When the afternoon heat settled in, the sky turned pale and still. Eli went to the well for water, and that's when he saw her stumble again. The bucket she carried was too heavy, sloshing water over her skirt. She gasped, trying to lift it straight, but her foot twisted. The edge of her skirt caught on a broken nail sticking out from a post, tearing a small piece near the bottom. Lydia froze instantly. Her face turned pale and she clutched at the fabric. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Don't look." Eli stepped back, surprised by her sudden fear. "It's all right, ma'am." "I won't," he said softly, turning his eyes away. He picked up the bucket instead and poured the water into the trough. When he looked back, she had turned away, breathing unevenly, pulling the skirt to cover her legs again. He didn't ask questions. He just helped her back to the house and said nothing more. That evening, the farm was quiet again. Lydia cooked supper while her father rested, and Eli worked in the barn until it grew too dark to see. When he finally walked toward the farmhouse, he heard something faint. A small sound carried on the night wind. It was soft at first, almost like a whisper, then clearer. It was Lydia, crying behind the barn. Eli stopped. His chest tightened, but he didn't move closer. Some pains were private, he thought. Still, standing there under the stars, listening to her quiet sobs, he felt something inside him change. He had seen many kinds of hardship in his life. Broken men, burned homes, and hungry winters. But there was something different in that sound. It wasn't weakness. It was a heart trying to carry more than it should. When she finally grew quiet, he looked up at the sky and promised himself something he couldn't explain. He didn't know how long he would stay on that farm, but he knew he wouldn't leave until Lydia Mayfield smiled without fear again. The night grew still. The horse shifted in the barn, the crickets sang, and the moonlight spilled across the fields like silver dust. Inside the small farmhouse, a lonely lamp still burned in the window. And for the first time in a long while, Eli Turner didn't feel like a wanderer. He felt like he had arrived exactly where he was meant to be. The next few days passed quietly on the Mayfield farm. Every morning, Eli was the first to rise, already at work before the sun burned through the mist. Lydia would step outside soon after, holding a small basket of eggs, always surprised to find him mending something. The fence, the shed, or the old wagon her father had given up on fixing. She tried to thank him, but Eli always brushed it off. "Work keeps me honest," he would say, smiling under the brim of his hat. Lydia had never known a man like him. The men from nearby towns were rough or lazy. Some came with loud words and empty promises. But Eli was quiet, kind, and strong in a way that didn't show off. He didn't ask questions about her life or pry into her secrets. He only helped, worked, and treated her father with respect. That made her feel safe. And yet, deep inside, she feared what would happen when he finally asked about the scars she hid so carefully. Her father, Thomas Mayfield, noticed the change in his daughter. She smiled more often now, though she tried to hide it. He saw her glance out the window when Eli passed by. The old man would cough and pretend not to see. One night, as Eli was heading back to the barn, Thomas called him aside. "You're a good worker, son," he said, his voice rough with age. "But this place has known sorrow. Don't ask questions you don't need answers to." Eli nodded slowly. "I understand, sir. I ain't here to cause trouble." "I believe that," the farmer said, staring into the fire. "Just be gentle with her." She's seen enough pain for one lifetime. Eli didn't ask what he meant, but those words stayed with him. The following morning, clouds rolled over the valley. The air smelled of rain. Eli worked near the barn, repairing a broken gate when he heard Lydia gasp behind him. She had dropped a bucket of water, spilling it over her dress. He turned quickly to help, but she backed away as if startled. Her face went pale and her hands trembled. "It's fine," she said quickly, bending to lift the bucket again. Eli stopped her gently. "You'll hurt yourself." "Let me," she shook her head. "No, please. I can manage." Her voice broke slightly at the end, and he saw fear flash across her eyes. Not fear of him, fear of being seen. He didn't argue. He picked up another bucket and poured water for the horses. When she turned to go, her skirt caught again on the same rusty nail that stuck out from the fence post. This time the tear was longer. The sound of fabric ripping cut through the silence. Lydia froze where she stood. Her hands shot down to grab the torn edge, pulling it close to her legs. Her breathing quickened. "Please," she whispered, her eyes filling with tears. "Don't look." Eli immediately turned away, his back toward her. "I won't, ma'am," he said quietly. "Take your time." He could hear her shaky breaths, the sound of cloth rustling as she tried to cover the tear. He said nothing. He just stood there pretending to study the sky until he heard her footsteps walk quickly toward the house. That night, supper was quiet. Lydia kept her eyes down, eating little. Her father tried to lighten the air with small talk, but the tension sat heavy like a shadow. When the meal ended, Lydia excused herself early and went to her room. Eli offered to wash the dishes, saying it was the least he could do. Thomas nodded slowly. "You've noticed," he said after a long pause, his voice low. "She tries to hide it, but it's hard to miss." Eli didn't reply. He waited for the old man to continue. "It happened 3 years ago," Thomas said, staring at his calloused hands. "A fire took half the barn. Lightning struck one night and the whole place went up. My wife was inside trying to save the horses. Lydia ran in after her. She got her out, but not before the fire got to her. The room was silent except for the wind tapping softly at the window. Her legs," Thomas continued, his eyes wet now, "they were burned bad. The doctor said she'd never walk right again. But she fought hard, learned to move, learned to stand. Still, she can't bear anyone seeing the scars. Says she feels ugly. She wears those long skirts even in summer heat. She doesn't want pity. She doesn't want eyes full of sorrow." Eli's throat tightened. He had guessed something like that, but hearing it broke something inside him. "She's got nothing to be ashamed of," he said quietly. The old man smiled sadly. "You and I know that. But she's young. The world isn't kind to those who carry scars where others can see them." Eli cleaned the last dish in silence. When he left for the barn, the rain had begun to fall, soft at first, then harder. The sound on the roof was steady and calm, but Eli couldn't sleep. He thought about the girl who hid her pain beneath worn fabric and polite smiles. He thought about the way she'd flinched when her skirt tore, how her voice trembled with shame. In the middle of the night, he heard a faint sound, a quiet sob carried through the rain. It was Lydia again, near the porch this time, her voice barely above the wind. He almost went to her, but something held him back. Maybe she needed to be alone. Or maybe she didn't know yet that some people could see scars and still find beauty. The next morning, the storm had passed, leaving the sky washed clean and bright. The farm smelled of wet soil and new hope. Lydia came out with her sleeves rolled up, determined as ever to start work. She didn't mention the night before, and neither did Eli. But something between them had changed. A fragile understanding, unspoken yet strong. When she tried to carry a heavy crate, Eli stepped in again, his tone soft but firm. "You'll hurt your back," he said. "I can do it," she insisted. "I know you can," he said, "but there's no shame in letting someone help." She looked at him for a long moment. Her lips parted as if to protest, then closed again. She nodded slowly. Together they lifted the crate. It was a small thing, but in that moment trust began to grow. Later that day, as they worked side by side, Lydia noticed something about him. How careful he was with everything he touched. He didn't slam doors or throw tools around like most men. He handled the smallest things with quiet patience, whether it was fixing a hinge or helping a chick back into its nest. Watching him made her realize that gentleness didn't come from weakness. It came from strength. That afternoon, the sky darkened again with heavy clouds. Thunder rolled across the valley. Eli was out checking the fence when he heard Lydia calling his name. Her voice was sharp with pain. He ran toward the sound and found her near the barn, sitting on the ground, clutching her ankle. The wheelbarrow she'd been pushing had tipped over. "I'm fine," she said quickly when he reached her. But her face was pale, her ankle already swelling. "Don't move," he said firmly, kneeling beside her. She shook her head, panicked. "Please don't." But he wasn't listening to her fear. He was focused on the injury. "You've hurt yourself," he said. "Let me see your ankle." Her skirt was soaked from the rain puddles. She gripped it tightly, tears rising again. "Please, Eli. Don't." He hesitated, realizing what she was afraid of. He met her eyes, steady and gentle. "Lydia," he said quietly, "I won't hurt you. I just want to help." She didn't answer. For a moment, they both sat still, the rain starting to fall again around them. Then she nodded once, almost too softly to see. Eli carefully lifted the edge of the fabric just enough to see her ankle. It was swollen badly, but what caught his breath were the scars, pale and jagged, climbing up from her foot like ghostly fingerprints of the fire that had changed her life. He froze, not because they frightened him, but because they told a story of pain and courage beyond words. Lydia turned her face away, ashamed, waiting for the disgust she expected to see. But Eli said nothing. He only took her hand gently and wrapped her ankle with his bandana to keep it still. "You shouldn't be walking on this," he said softly. "Let me carry you." She tried to protest, but the pain made her gasp. Eli lifted her as if she weighed nothing, his steps steady and slow through the rain. She kept her face hidden against his shoulder, afraid to see his eyes. But if she had looked, she would have seen only tears, not of pity, but of heartbreak and respect. Inside the house, he set her carefully on the chair by the fire. Her father rushed over, alarmed, but Eli said only, "She twisted her ankle." "I'll take care of the chores till she's well." Thomas nodded, his eyes meeting Eli's with silent gratitude. That night, after she was asleep, Eli sat by the barn window, staring out at the lightning flashing over the hills. He understood now why she hid behind quiet words and long skirts. But he also knew something else, that her courage burned brighter than any flame that had ever hurt her. And as the thunder rolled far away, Eli Turner made himself a quiet promise he didn't say out loud. He would never let her believe that scars made her less, not while he was there. The rain didn't stop for 2 days. The sky stayed gray, the ground soft and muddy. Inside the farmhouse, time seemed to slow. Eli worked from morning till night, taking care of the animals, fixing broken things, and keeping the place running while Lydia rested. She tried to help, but every time she tried to stand, pain shot through her ankle and she had to sit again. Her father kept her company, but even he noticed how often she looked out the window toward the barn, where Eli was working in the rain. He didn't seem to mind the weather. His hat dripped with water, his coat soaked through, but his hands never stopped moving. Lydia watched him with quiet wonder. She couldn't remember the last time anyone had worked so hard for them without asking for anything in return. By the third morning, the sun broke through the clouds again, lighting the wet fields in soft gold. Eli came into the house, his hands rough and damp, asking if Lydia needed anything. She smiled faintly from her chair near the window. "You've already done everything, Mr. Turner." He shook his head. "Not everything. You still look like you haven't eaten enough." Her father chuckled from the corner. "He's right, Lydia. That boy's been working like 10 men and still worries about you." Lydia blushed slightly, pretending to adjust the blanket around her legs. "I'm fine. The swelling's almost gone." Eli nodded, though he noticed how she avoided meeting his eyes. He didn't want to make her uncomfortable, so he stepped back toward the door. "I'll check the fence again. Storm might have knocked it loose." "Eli," she said quietly before he could leave. "Thank you for helping me that day." He turned slightly, his voice low. "No thanks needed. You'd have done the same for me." She didn't reply, but her eyes followed him as he stepped outside again. As the day passed, the air turned warm, and the farm seemed to breathe again. Birds returned to the trees. The animals stirred restlessly, happy for the sun. Lydia finally managed to stand and walk with the help of a wooden cane her father had carved years ago. She limped slowly out to the porch, watching Eli work near the corral. He was fixing a post, sleeves rolled up, sweat on his brow, humming softly to himself. When he saw her, he set his hammer down and smiled. "You're up. That's good to see. I couldn't stay inside forever, she said, leaning on the porch rail. You've done more than enough. I should be helping, he shook his head. You'll help soon enough. No use hurting yourself again. Lydia laughed softly, a sound like wind chimes. You sound just like my father. Well, Eli said, brushing dust from his hands. He's a wise man. She watched him a moment, then her eyes softened. He told you, didn't he? Eli froze for a second, not sure what to say. About the fire? He asked gently. She nodded, her face pale. I guessed he might. He worries someone will misunderstand. I don't misunderstand, Eli said quietly. You were brave. Her eyes shimmered in the sunlight. Brave? She repeated in disbelief. I was foolish. I ran into the fire. I should have waited for help, but I couldn't. My mother was inside. Eli took a slow step closer, his voice calm and warm. You saved her life. That's not foolish. Lydia shook her head, tears gathering in her eyes. You didn't see what happened after? The townspeople talked. They looked at me like I was different. Some wouldn't even let their children near me. I tried to go to church one Sunday and a woman whispered, Poor thing, she'll never find anyone now. I never went back. Eli's hands clenched slightly at his sides, anger flickering in his chest. People can be cruel, he said softly. But they're wrong. You've got more courage than most men I've known. She blinked back tears, whispering, You don't have to say that. I'm not saying it to be kind, he replied. I'm saying it because it's true. For a long moment they stood in silence, the soft sound of wind passing through the wheat fields between them. Lydia finally looked down, a small smile touching her lips. You really are different, Eli Turner. He smiled faintly. So I've been told. The days grew longer and the farm began to heal in its own way. Eli stayed on, saying he'd move along once harvest came, but Thomas insisted he take a proper wage. Eli refused. Food and a roof's enough, he said. At night he sometimes sat outside staring at the stars. The land stretched wide and endless, but it no longer felt lonely. Lydia would often step outside quietly, bringing him a cup of warm tea. They would sit without words, watching the fireflies blink over the fields. She told him stories about her childhood, about the dog she once had, about her mother who sang to the cows at milking time. Eli listened with quiet attention. Every word she spoke drew him closer, though he never said so aloud. He had seen beauty in many places, sunsets over canyons, rivers glowing in the dawn. But there was something in Lydia's voice, something strong and gentle that no landscape could match. One evening, when the wind was cool and the sky full of pink light, Lydia tried to walk to the barn. Her ankle was better, but her steps were still uneven. Eli was inside, brushing his horse. When he saw her at the door, he set the brush aside. You shouldn't walk so far, he said. I needed air, she answered, smiling. And I wanted to thank you properly. You've done so much. You don't owe me thanks, Lydia. I do, she said softly. Before you came, I thought this place was dying. I thought maybe. I was too. Now I feel like there's life again. Eli looked at her for a long time, unsure what to say. He wasn't a man of fancy words. He simply said, Sometimes life just needs someone to believe in it again. She stepped closer, the light falling gently across her face. And what about you, Eli? What do you believe in? He smiled faintly, glancing out the barn door at the open fields. I used to think I believed in the road. Just moving on, never stopping too long in one place. But now I'm not so sure. Lydia studied him quietly. Maybe you found a place worth stopping for. He looked back at her, their eyes meeting in the soft evening light. The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was calm, like two hearts finding the same rhythm for the first time. Before he could speak, a clap of thunder echoed in the distance. A storm was forming again over the hills. Eli hurried to close the barn doors, but Lydia stumbled slightly as the wind picked up. He caught her arm gently to steady her. For a second, they stood close enough for him to see the faint line of a scar on her neck, a reminder of the fire she had survived. She noticed his eyes flicker to it and stepped back quickly, turning away. Please, she whispered, her voice breaking. Don't look at me like that. Like what? Eli asked softly. Like you pity me, she said, tears rising. Eli shook his head. It's not pity, it's respect. She turned back slowly, confused. Respect? He nodded. You lived through something that would have broken most people. You're still standing. That deserves respect. Lydia's tears spilled then, not from pain, but from something she hadn't felt in years. She whispered, "No one's ever said that to me before." Eli smiled gently. "Then maybe it's about time someone did." The thunder rolled again, closer now. He led her back toward the house before the rain came, his hand steady at her elbow. As they walked, she felt a warmth inside her that had nothing to do with the firelight waiting ahead. It was the feeling of being seen, not as broken, but as whole. That night, as the storm raged outside, Lydia sat by her window, unable to sleep. The rain poured down hard, but inside her heart there was a quiet calm. For the first time since the fire, she felt safe. She looked out toward the barn, where a single lamp still glowed faintly. Eli was awake too, probably making sure the horses were calm through the thunder. She whispered into the darkness, "Thank you, Eli Turner." Out in the barn, Eli sat by the dim lantern, staring at the ribbon she had used to tie her hair earlier that day. She had dropped it when she came to thank him. He held it gently, feeling the softness between his calloused fingers. He thought about leaving when the rain stopped, about returning to the road, to the wandering life he'd always known. But the idea no longer felt right. The road no longer called to him the same way. Something stronger was pulling him now, something quiet, something human, something that felt a lot like home. And as lightning flashed outside, he whispered the same words she had said across the distance without knowing. "Thank you, Lydia Mayfield." Morning came slowly after the storm. The air smelled fresh, the sky washed clean and bright. Sunlight poured over the wet fields, making everything shine as if the land itself had been reborn. Eli stepped out of the barn early, his boots sinking slightly in the damp earth. He breathed in the air and felt something different, peace. Inside the farmhouse, Lydia was already awake, her ankle wrapped but strong enough for her to walk carefully around the kitchen. Her father still slept in his chair by the fire. She moved quietly so she wouldn't wake him. When Eli knocked on the open door, she turned, smiling softly. "You're up early again," she said. "Habit," he replied, tipping his hat. "Old cowboys like me don't know how to rest." She laughed lightly. "Then maybe this place will finally teach you." He stepped inside, noticing the table already set. "You shouldn't be standing so long," he said gently. She waved her hand. "If I sit all day, I'll go mad. Besides, I like the mornings. Everything feels new." Eli smiled faintly. "That it does." They ate breakfast together, simple bread and coffee. But the silence between them was warm now, not awkward. The kind of quiet that two people share when they don't need to fill it with words. After her father woke, Eli went back outside to the barn. He had promised to fix the old wagon that hadn't moved in years. All day, Lydia watched him through the window as he worked. The sound of his hammer and saw felt comforting, like music. The farm had been silent for too long before he came. Now it was alive again, full of steady movement and purpose. Sometimes she caught herself humming softly, a habit she thought she had lost with her mother. When the sun reached its highest point, she brought Eli a jug of cold water. He was sitting by the wagon wheel, wiping sweat from his forehead. She handed it to him and he smiled gratefully. "Careful," he said as she stepped on uneven ground. "That ankle of yours still looks tender." "It's fine," she said, though she leaned on the post just in case. "You've done so much around here, Eli. My father says we haven't had this place look so strong in years." He took a sip of water, then said, "Your father's the heart of this farm." "I just help it beat again." She looked at him for a moment, her eyes soft. "Maybe. But sometimes hearts need a little push to remember how." He smiled at her words but didn't reply. Some feelings didn't need to be spoken. Later that afternoon, a neighbor rode by, an older man named Carter who had once done business with the Mayfields. He hadn't been around since the fire. When he saw Lydia, he tipped his hat politely but couldn't help staring too long at her covered legs. Eli noticed it instantly. "Afternoon, Carter," he said, stepping between them with calm authority. "You lost or just visiting?" The man laughed awkwardly. "Just passing through. Didn't know the farm still had help." "Seems it does," Eli said, his voice steady but firm. Carter nodded and muttered something about the weather before riding off. Lydia watched quietly, feeling both embarrassed and grateful. Eli turned to her and smiled gently. "Don't mind him. Some folks can't see past their own narrow thoughts. She lowered her eyes. I should be used to it. Doesn't mean you have to accept it, he said softly. Her eyes lifted, and for a moment she felt strength return to her. It wasn't the words themselves that gave her courage. It was the way he said them, as if he truly believed every syllable. As the days passed, the harvest drew near. Eli helped Thomas repair the plow and prepare the storage barn. The work was hard, but Eli seemed tireless. He laughed more now, even sang sometimes under his breath while he worked. Lydia joined in small tasks, gathering eggs, sorting grain, sewing cloth sacks. The rhythm of life returned slowly, steady as the sunrise. One evening after supper, her father went to bed early. The night air was cool and the sky was filled with stars. Lydia stepped onto the porch, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. She saw Eli sitting on the steps, whittling a piece of wood into a small figure. "What are you making?" she asked, sitting beside him. He smiled. "Just passing time. Used to carve little horses when I was younger." She leaned closer. The small figure already looked like a galloping mare. "You're talented," she said. "Idle hands get me in trouble," he replied. "So I keep them busy." They sat quietly for a while, listening to crickets. Then Lydia spoke, her voice soft. "I used to sit here with my mother every night. She loved watching the stars. She said each one was a story, every light in the sky a life that mattered." Eli looked up at the sky. She was right. "She was the bravest person I knew," Lydia said, her voice trembling slightly. "She saved me that night. I always wished I could have saved her instead." Eli turned toward her, his tone gentle. "You did save her, Lydia. Maybe not from the fire, but from losing you. That's what she ran into those flames for. To make sure you lived. You honored that by surviving." Tears filled Lydia's eyes, but she didn't look away. "I used to think my scars were a punishment," she whispered. "But maybe they're just proof that I lived through something I wasn't supposed to." Eli nodded slowly. "They're proof you're stronger than what tried to destroy you." She looked down at her hands, her heart pounding with something that felt new and warm. "You always know what to say, Eli Turner." He smiled softly. "No, ma'am. I just say what I see." A breeze moved through the trees, carrying the faint scent of rain. Lydia glanced at the wooden figure he had carved and noticed he had etched small lines into its side. Scars, like faint marks that made it unique. She touched it gently. "You carved this for me?" He shrugged. "Seemed right. She's a fighter. Thought you might understand that." Lydia held the small wooden horse in her palm, her thumb brushing over the smooth surface. For the first time, she didn't feel the need to hide her hands or her face. She felt seen, not for what she had lost, but for what she still was. The next day, she woke early to the sound of laughter. Eli and her father were outside arguing playfully over the right way to stack hay bales. She leaned against the window frame, smiling as the morning light filled the room. The house didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt alive again, like the ghosts of the past had finally begun to rest. That afternoon, she joined Eli in the fields, walking slowly, her cane sinking into the soil. When she tripped on a root, Eli was at her side in a moment. "I'm fine," she said, laughing at herself. "I didn't doubt it," he said, steadying her gently. "But you don't have to do everything alone anymore." She looked at him with quiet eyes. "That's the hardest thing to remember," he smiled. "Then I'll remind you until it sticks." They worked together until the sun began to fall. The sky turned orange and pink, the air filled with the smell of wheat and dust. As they walked back toward the house, Lydia stopped suddenly and looked out at the horizon. "It's strange," she said softly. "For years I hated this land. Every hill reminded me of that night. Every shadow felt like smoke. But now it feels different, like maybe it's healing too." Eli looked out with her, the light painting their faces gold. Sometimes places heal the same way people do, slowly, quietly, with a little help. She smiled, turning to face him. "You talk like someone who's been healing too." He met her gaze for a long moment, then said, "Maybe I am." That night, as darkness settled and the crickets sang again, Lydia placed the wooden horse on her nightstand beside her bed. The scars Eli had carved into it caught the candlelight, glowing like silver lines. She smiled to herself before blowing out the flame. In the barn, Eli lay awake, staring at the stars through the cracks in the roof. He thought about the woman inside that house, strong, brave, beautiful in ways most people never saw. He thought about how he had come to this valley looking for work and found something far more valuable. For the first time in years, Eli Turner didn't dream about the road ahead. He dreamed about staying, about a life that didn't need to be chased down, about mornings that began with laughter and evenings that ended with soft words under a silver sky. And outside, the fields whispered softly in the night wind, as if the land itself was at peace, finally alive again, just like the people who called it home. Weeks passed and the Mayfield farm began to look like a place reborn. The fields shimmered with gold, the fences stood straight and strong, and even the old windmill turned proudly in the autumn breeze. The air was filled with the smell of harvest, of ripe grain, sun-dried hay, and clean earth after rain. Eli worked from dawn until the stars came out, but he never seemed tired. There was peace in his face now, the kind that only comes from belonging somewhere. Lydia moved more easily these days. Her limp was lighter, her laughter brighter. Sometimes Eli would look at her and hardly believe she was the same woman he met that first evening, by the broken fence. The pain was still there, deep inside, but she carried it differently now, like a story she had learned to live with instead of run from. Her father often sat on the porch watching the two of them work together. He saw the way Eli's eyes softened when he looked at his daughter, and the way Lydia smiled when she thought Eli wasn't watching. He never said anything about it. Some things he knew grew best in silence. One cool morning, Lydia came out carrying 2 cups of coffee. Eli was fixing the latch on the chicken coop. She handed him one and said, "You'll be gone after the harvest, won't you?" Eli looked at her carefully, trying to read her expression. "That was the plan," he said quietly. "I don't like to overstay where I'm not needed." She looked down at her hands, her voice soft. "You've been needed here more than you know," he smiled faintly. "Well, maybe for a little while. But this land will stand fine without me now. You and your father made it strong again." Her fingers tightened around the coffee cup. "You helped us find that strength," he nodded slowly. "And maybe you helped me find mine." Neither spoke for a moment. The only sound was the gentle clucking of hens and the distant call of a crow. Lydia finally broke the silence. "If you do leave," she said, her voice trembling a little, "I want you to take something with you." She went back inside and returned with a small box wrapped in a piece of cloth. She handed it to him. Eli opened it carefully. Inside lay the little wooden horse he had carved for her, the one she had kept beside her bed. She had polished it and tied around its neck a narrow ribbon, soft blue, slightly faded. "I can't take this," he said softly. "You have to," she replied. "It will remind you that this place and the people in it will always be grateful." Eli's throat tightened. He tried to smile, but his voice wavered. "You sure about this?" She nodded. "It's yours. You gave it life, and it gave me hope." Eli wrapped the horse gently and placed it in his coat pocket. He didn't say thank you. Some words were too small for what he felt. That afternoon, he helped her father load the last of the hay bales into the barn. The old man's hands were shaking, but his spirit seemed stronger than ever. As the sun dipped low, painting the sky in orange and violet, Thomas leaned on his cane and looked at Eli. "You've done more for this family than you'll ever know," he said. "If there's anything I can give you, name it." Eli shook his head. "You've already given me something I didn't even know I was looking for." Thomas smiled knowingly. "You mean her." Eli didn't answer, but the silence said everything. That night the air was still and cool. The crickets sang softly and a half-moon shone over the quiet farm. Lydia couldn't sleep. She went to the window, her heart heavy with thoughts she couldn't shake. Tomorrow Eli would ride away. She knew he didn't belong to any one place, that the road was in his blood. But the thought of waking up and not hearing his boots on the porch or his voice calling the horses made her chest ache. She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and stepped outside. The grass was cool beneath her feet, the world silver in the moonlight. Eli was sitting near the barn, leaning against a post, staring up at the stars. He turned when he heard her footsteps. "Couldn't sleep either?" he asked softly. She shook her head. "I thought maybe I'd say goodbye now before the morning makes it harder." He looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "Goodbyes are never easy," he said finally. Lydia walked closer, her hands trembling slightly. "You came here a stranger, Eli Turner. But you're leaving this place as something more." Eli smiled faintly. "Maybe, but I reckon this land gave me more than I gave it." She shook her head. "You gave it life again. You gave us all life again." They stood in silence for a long time, the wind rustling through the wheat. Then Lydia spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "When you first came here, I didn't believe I could ever feel whole again. I was broken inside even more than I let anyone see, but you made me believe there's still goodness in this world. You made me see myself as more than my scars." Eli swallowed hard, his voice rough. "You didn't need me for that, Lydia. It was already in you. You just needed someone to remind you." She took a small step closer, her eyes glistening in the moonlight. "Will you come back someday?" He didn't answer right away. He looked out over the fields, then back at her. "If the road ever brings me this way again, you'll see me walking up that path before sunrise." She nodded, though her lips trembled. "Then I'll keep the lamp burning just in case." Eli smiled softly. "Then I'll find my way home." The words hung between them like a promise. For a moment, neither moved. The night was quiet except for the low sound of crickets and the whisper of the wind through the wheat. Then slowly, Eli reached into his pocket and pulled out the ribbon she had tied around the wooden horse. He untied it and held it out to her. "I'll keep the horse," he said, "but this belongs here. A piece of you. A piece of home." She looked at it, tears slipping down her cheeks. "Then you better come back for it one day," he smiled. "I will." The next morning, the sound of hooves broke the stillness of dawn. Lydia stood on the porch beside her father, watching Eli ride away down the dirt road. The sun rose behind him, painting the horizon gold. He didn't look back right away, maybe because he couldn't. But halfway down the road he turned, lifted his hat, and gave one last smile. Lydia raised her hand in return. She didn't cry this time. There was sadness, yes, but also peace. She knew some people weren't meant to stay forever. Some came only long enough to change your life, and then the world called them onward. As the days turned into weeks, the farm stayed strong. Lydia took over more work, her limp barely noticeable now. Her father's health held steady, and the house felt full of light. Every evening, Lydia lit the lamp by the window, just as she had promised. Sometimes she would stand outside at sunset, looking down the road, imagining the sound of approaching hooves. She'd smile softly, whispering to the wind, "Wherever you are, Eli Turner, I hope you're safe." One afternoon, as autumn deepened and the leaves began to fall, Lydia went to the barn to gather tools. On the table, she found something she hadn't seen before, a small envelope yellowed at the edges with her name written in careful handwriting. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was a short note that read, "You once said the stars tell stories. I reckon ours is one of them now. Keep watching the skies. You'll know when it's time." Underneath the note lay a small silver button, the kind that came from a cowboy's coat. Lydia held it against her heart, tears shining in her eyes. She didn't know when he had left it there, but somehow she knew what it meant. He hadn't said goodbye after all. He had simply said, "Until next time." That night she stood on the porch again, the wooden horse in her hands, the silver button beside it. The lamp burned softly in the window. The stars above shimmered bright and endless, and one of them seemed to flicker a little stronger than the rest. She smiled through her tears. Somewhere out there, beyond the hills and the miles of open road, Eli Turner was still riding, his heart carrying the memory of a farm that had saved him as much as he had saved it. And under the wide, forgiving sky, Lydia Mayfield whispered a quiet prayer of thanks, not for what she had lost, but for what she had found. Because in the end, scars didn't make her weak, they made her whole. And though the road carried him away, she knew deep in her heart that one day, when the wind turned warm again and the wheat fields shone gold, she would see the dust rise on the horizon, and the cowboy would come home.